time London got a secret underground railway. It wasn't for people, it was for mail. This railway was a huge project. It was built because London had a big problem. The city was growing fast, more people lived there. More businesses opened, and more mail needed to move around. London in the late 1800s and early 1900s was a busy place. It was a big city, it was getting bigger all the time. This meant more everything. More houses, more shops, more offices, and with all that came more mail. Letters, parcels, postcards. They all needed to go from one place to another. The post office had a tough job. It had to get all this mail sorted, then it had to move it. It moved mail between the big sorting offices. It moved mail to and from train stations. Train stations were important. Mail came into London by train from other cities. Mail left London by train for other cities. So getting mail to these stations quickly was a big deal. But the streets of London were a mess. They were full of horse-drawn carts. They had early motor vehicles. There were buses. There were taxis. All these things moved slowly. The roads were often blocked. Traffic jams were normal. Imagine trying to deliver thousands of letters and parcels in that kind of chaos. It was hard. Post office vans were horse-drawn. They were slow. They took up a lot of space on the road. They needed stables for the horses. They needed people to look after the horses. This was all expensive, and it wasn't fast enough. A van might get stuck in traffic for a long time. This meant mail was late. Late mail caused problems for everyone. Businesses wanted their letters on time. People wanted their parcels quickly. The post office wanted to do its job well. The post office tried hard to keep up. It added more vans, it hired more drivers. But the problem just got worse. The city kept growing. The amount of mail kept growing even faster. The roads couldn't handle it. The system was breaking. It was clear something new was needed. Something big. Something that could move mail away from the jammed streets. Something that could work all day and all night without traffic. The idea of an underground railway started to make sense. It was a bold idea, but London needed a bold solution. The city's mail system was at a standstill. It needed a way to flow freely again. That's why people started thinking about tunnels. Tunnels under the busy streets. A secret path for the mail. The post office was under pressure. It had to deliver mail efficiently. It had to be reliable, but the surface transport was just too slow. It was unreliable. It cost too much money for what it delivered. The horses, the drivers, the delays, the fuel for the early motor vans. All of it added up. And the delays meant bad service. Bad service meant complaints. The post office wanted to be a modern service. It wanted to be a leader. It could not do that with old ways of moving mail on busy roads. So the problem was simple. Too much mail, too much traffic, too slow a journey for the mail. A better way was needed. An underground way was proposed. It was a way to bypass all the problems above ground. It was a dream of speed and efficiency. A dream of getting the mail where it needed to go, on time, every time. This dream led to the secret railway. People had thought about underground transport for a while. Not just for mail, for people too. London already had some underground lines for passengers. These showed that tunnels could be built. They showed that trains could run underground. But this mail railway was different. It would be smaller. It would be fully automatic. And it would be only for mail. Before the idea of a full railway, smaller ideas were tried. One idea was pneumatic tubes. These were like big pipes. Mail could be put into a container. Then air pressure would push the container through the tube. This worked for small amounts of mail. It worked for telegrams. But it was not good for big mail bags. It was not good for lots of parcels. The tubes were too small. You could not move enough mail fast enough. So pneumatic tubes were not the answer for London's huge mail problem. Then came the vision for an electric railway. A proper railway, but a small one. It would have its own tunnels, it would have its own stations, and it would have its own special trains. These trains would run on electricity. Electricity was new and modern. It was clean. It was quiet. It was efficient. It could power trains deep underground. Key people pushed this idea forward. One important person was J.H. Greathed. He was an engineer. He worked on other underground railways in London. He knew how to dig tunnels through London's clay. He understood the challenges. His work made the idea of a post office railway seem possible. If passenger trains could run deep underground, why not mail trains? The post office saw the potential. It was clear that surface transport was failing. An underground railway could be the answer. It could connect the main sorting offices. It could connect them to the major train stations. Their mail could be moved quickly between these key points. It would skip all the road traffic. It would save time. It would save money in the long run. Initial planning started. This wasn't a small project, it was a massive undertaking. It would involve digging tunnels across the city. Tunnels under buildings, tunnels under other underground lines. It would mean building special stations deep down. These stations needed lifts to bring the mail up to street level. They needed platforms for the trains. The post office had to get approval for this. It needed money. It needed to convince the government that this was a good idea. They argued it would make the mail service much better. It would speed things up for everyone. And it would show that Britain was modern and innovative. It was a big ask. Building a railway like this was expensive. It was complex, but the need was so great that the idea gained traction. Engineers and planners drew up maps. They planned the route. It would stretch from Paddington in the west to Whitechapel in the east. This route would connect all the important post office hubs. It would be the backbone of London's mail network. The scale of the project was huge. It was a dream of engineers and postal workers alike. A dream of a city where mail moved smoothly, silently under the ground. It was a secret solution for a public problem. The idea was to build a narrow-gauge railway. This meant the tracks would be closer together than a normal train line. This allowed for smaller tunnels. Smaller tunnels meant less digging meant less cost. And less disruption on the surface. The trains would be small too. They would carry mail bags and parcels in special wagons. And they would be automatic. No drivers. This was a very advanced idea for its time. It showed great foresight. It was a sign of the future. The post office was thinking ahead. It was preparing for a London that would only get bigger and busier. It was an ambitious plan. But it was a necessary one. Building an underground railway is hard work. Building one in a busy city like London is even harder. And building one in secret mostly adds another layer. The post office wanted to keep the disruption low. And maybe they just didn't want too much public fuss during the building phase, so for a long time it was a project mostly out of sight. The construction started in 1914, but then World War I began. This caused big delays. Workers were needed for the war effort. Materials were scarce. The project slowed down a lot. It wasn't until after the war that work picked up properly again. Tunneling in London is always a challenge. The ground is mostly London clay. This clay is tricky. It can be stable sometimes. But it can also be very soft. It can be wet. Digging through it needed special methods. They used tunnel boring machines, TBMs. These machines cut through the earth. They helped line the tunnel with concrete or cast iron segments as they went. This kept the tunnel stable. It stopped it from collapsing. It was a slow and steady process. Some parts of the railway were built using cut and cover. This meant digging a trench from the surface, then building the tunnel structure inside the trench, then covering it back up. This was used where the railway was not too deep. But for most of the route, it was deep tunneling. Deep tunneling meant less disturbance on the surface. But it also meant more difficult working conditions for the men. Building the stations was a huge part of the job. These stations were deep underground. They had to be carefully planned. Each station needed multiple levels. There were platforms for the trains, there were shafts for the lifts. These lifts would bring mail bags from the street level down to the train platforms. And they would take mail bags up from the platforms to the sorting offices above. Special sorting areas were built underground too. Everything had to flow smoothly. Mail would arrive, go down the lift, get put on a train, or it would come off a train, go up the lift, and get sorted. Laying the tracks was next. The railway used a narrow gauge. This meant the two rails were closer together than on a normal train line. It was only about 2 feet wide. This allowed for smaller tunnels and smaller trains. It saved space, it saved money, and it was perfect for carrying mail. The trains themselves were very special. They were small, they were electric, and they were designed to be driverless. This was cutting-edge technology for the time. Each train had a few wagons. These wagons were designed to hold mail bags and parcels. The whole system was built to be automatic. This meant fewer people were needed to run it. It would save on labor costs. It would also allow trains to run very frequently. The power supply was critical. The railway needed a reliable source of electricity. This power ran the trains. It ran the lifts. It ran the lights in the tunnels and stations. Special power cables were laid alongside the tracks. The human element was important. Thousands of workers were involved. They worked long hours. They worked in dark, damp, often dangerous conditions. Digging tunnels is not easy. There were risks. Risks of accidents, risks of breathing bad air, but they built this amazing piece of engineering. They created this secret network under London. The construction took many years. It started in 1914. It was mostly finished by the mid-1920s. It was a massive effort. It cost a lot of money, but the vision was strong. The post office knew this railway would change everything for mail delivery in London. It was a testament to the engineering skill of the time. It was a hidden marvel, built right under everyone's feet. The Post Office Railway, or Mail Rail as it's often called, opened in 1927. After all those years of planning and building, it was finally ready. It was a game changer for London's mail. The railway's route was clever. It stretched about 6.5 miles. It went from Paddington in the west to Whitechapel in the east. Along this route, it connected 6 major sorting offices. These were big buildings where mail was processed. It also connected to Liverpool Street Station. This meant mail could move straight from the main railway lines, deep underground, to the sorting offices. Here's how it worked. Mail would arrive at a sorting office. It would be put into special mail bags or containers. These containers were designed to fit neatly onto the trains. Then these containers would be loaded onto big lifts. The lifts would take the mail down to the railway platforms deep below the ground. Once on the platform, the containers were loaded onto the small electric trains. These trains were quite compact. Each train had several wagons, typically carrying a total of around 15 mail bags. The whole system was automatic. This was the really smart part. There were no drivers on the trains. Instead, a control room managed everything. Signals and switches guided the trains. They knew exactly where to go. They knew when to start. They knew when to stop. The trains moved fast. They could reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. That was much faster than any horse-drawn van or early motor vehicle could manage through London traffic. And they ran very frequently. During peak times, a train might leave every few minutes from each station. This meant mail was always moving. It didn't sit around waiting. When a train reached its destination station, the process reversed. The mail containers were unloaded from the train, they went onto another lift. The lift carried them up to the sorting office above. There, the mail would be processed for delivery to its final address, or it would be transferred to another train for out-of-London delivery. The impact of this railway was huge. It made mail delivery much faster, it made it much more reliable. For mail that used to take hours to cross the city on congested roads now took minutes. It reduced the number of post office vans on the streets. This helped ease traffic a little bit. It also cut down on pollution. The post office saved money too. While building it was expensive, running it was efficient. Fewer people were needed compared to a fleet of surface vehicles. The electric trains were cheaper to run than petrol-guzzling vans. And the reliability meant less time spent fixing problems. The system operated for decades, day and night. It ran on weekends and holidays. It was always there, silently moving mail under the city. Maintenance crews kept the trains and tunnels in good order. They checked the tracks. They maintained the electrical systems, they fixed any problems quickly. It was a unique system in the world. No other city had anything quite like it. It was a source of pride for the post office. It showed the world how modern and forward-thinking British engineering could be. For many years, London's mail moved smoothly and efficiently thanks to the secret underground workforce. It truly was the hidden heart of the city's communication network. The system was designed for maximum efficiency. Every part of it, the way the mailbags loaded, the way the trains ran automatically, the speed, the frequency, it was a marvel of automation for its era. It kept London connected. It ensured that businesses could operate effectively. It made sure people got their letters and parcels without long waits. For the post office, it allowed them to manage the ever-increasing volume of mail that flowed through the capital. This railway was not just a convenience, it was a fundamental piece of infrastructure that kept a modern city ticking. It worked so well that for decades, most Londoners didn't even know it existed. The Post Office Railway ran for over 75 years. It was a great success for most of that time, but things changed, and eventually the railway faced new challenges that led to its closure. One big reason for its closure was changes in mail handling. Over time, the post office started processing mail differently. They moved towards huge automated sorting centers. These centers were often outside the city center. This meant the old network of central post office sorting offices became less important. Mail wasn't being sent between these central offices as much anymore. It was being sent to big regional hubs instead. The railway was designed for a different kind of mail network. Another factor was the improvement of road transport. While the railway was being built, road transport was slow and unreliable, but over the decades, lorries got much bigger. They got faster, they became more fuel efficient, the motorway network grew. This meant that moving mail by road became more viable. It was often cheaper to use a big lorry to take mail directly from a new regional sorting center to its destination, even if it was across London. The delays on city roads were still there, but bigger lorries could carry huge amounts of mail, making road transport more competitive. Then there were the operating costs. The railway was getting old. It needed more maintenance. Parts were harder to find. It needed modernizing. This would have cost a lot of money. The trains needed work, the tunnels needed repairs, the control systems were outdated. Running the railway every day with its dedicated staff became very expensive. The post office had to look at its budget. It had to make tough choices about where to spend its money. The rise of airmail also played a part. More and more mail was being flown around the world. This changed the priorities for speed. The post office focused more on getting mail to airports quickly. The Underground Railway was great for moving mail across central London, but it didn't connect to Heathrow or Gatwick. In 2003, the decision was made to close the Post Office Railway. It was a sad day for many people who had worked on it or understood its historical importance. The last journey took place on May 31st, 2003. It marked the end of an era. The railway had served London well, but its time had passed. So, what happened to the tunnels and trains? They didn't just disappear. The tunnels are still there, deep under London. For a while they sat empty, but then a new idea came along. Part of the railway system has been preserved. London's Postal Museum now uses a section of the old railway. Visitors can actually ride on a special passenger train through some of the tunnels. It's a way for people to experience this amazing piece of history. They can see the trains, they can see the tunnels, they can learn about how it all worked. It's a chance to go back in time. The Post Office Railway's place in history is secure. It stands as a testament to early 20th century innovation. It showed what engineers could do. It showed what a big organization like the Post Office could achieve when faced with a huge problem. It was a truly unique piece of engineering. It was ahead of its time. It was a system that worked automatically for decades, long before computers were common. Its uniqueness is what makes it so fascinating. It was a secret world under the city. A world that quietly kept London's communication flowing. It's a reminder of a time when people looked for big, bold solutions to urban problems. It's a story of engineering and problem solving, and even though it closed, its legacy continues. It reminds us of a time when the post office was not just about delivering letters, but also about building a whole hidden infrastructure to make that happen.